Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. Calling our committee meeting to order at 4 o'clock. Let's do introductions around the room, and then we didn't ask anybody to do a labor acknowledgement, but I have one to do, so I can do that part. So I'm Thea Agnew-Bemba, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the committee. Celeste.
Hello, I'm Celeste Hodge-Broughton, President and CEO of the Alaska Black Caucus.
Okay, Jasmine.
Jasmine Akers, Deputy Clerk and Staff to the committee.
Great, and Joan.
Hi everyone, this is Joan Ryan, Board President of Enlaces.
Great. And Marie.
Yes, hi, Marie Husa, Alaska Federation of Filipino Americans member.
Great. Awesome. We're just doing introductions. Do you want to say hello?
Sure.
Sit anywhere.
Grab it. Hi, Matthew Hurd, Legislative Counsel to the Assembly.
Great. Okay, thanks for joining everyone. I'm guessing some other folks will come. And just a reminder that at our last meeting we passed our charter, so we have to have 7 members as a quorum to pass any action, but we can meet without taking action. So we can think about that as we go forward this evening, and if we want to take action, hopefully we'll have 7 members by the time we're ready to do that. Okay, I'm going to do a land and labor acknowledgement, and I wrote one that's a little more personal than normal, so just bear with me. I want to give a personal acknowledgement today. My dad came over to my house last night. He's 83. He worked for Providence for 47 years as a doctor in long-term care. He's a good person, and he would still be working if he had his choice and COVID hadn't stopped. My parents are British and white. They moved here in 1973 because a friend of my dad's was working for BP. It was the start of Prudhoe Bay and the start of the oil boom here. But if I go back 2 generations in my family, my dad's grandfather spent 35 years in Brazil building a railroad. When he returned to Britain in his old age, he was wealthy and he married a younger woman and had 1 son who's my dad's dad. Both of those parents died in the flu epidemic in 1918, and my dad's dad inherited the wealth from his father, which eventually paid for my dad to go to medical school, which eventually allowed us to move here. I gave my dad a book, Isabel Wilkerson's book that's called The Warmth of Other Suns, about the Great Migration of Black Americans in the 1900s. And last night when he was over, he was talking about one of the people interviewed in the book, whose name is Dr. Robert Foster. Dr. Foster was born in Louisiana in 1919. He went to a segregated college and went to medical school. He served in the US military. He returned to Louisiana where he was hoping to live, but he decided to leave because of Jim Crow and segregation. He drove to California, where he wanted to move to, and during that drive, he had to travel all the way across Arizona without stopping, because there was not one place in that whole state that would offer him food, lodging, or even a bathroom. Eventually, Dr. Foster made it to California, and after a number of years, he built a successful practice there and a comfortable life. But when I think of my dad's life compared to Dr. Foster, I have a number of things that I want to acknowledge. Number one, my family are colonizers, and the material security of my childhood came from the wealth that was taken from people in Brazil 2 generations before. Number 2, my parents were welcomed to Alaska in 1973 at the same time that Black Americans, whose families for hundreds of years had labored and died and suffered enslavement and cruelty and had literally built and grown the wealth of this country, were not even allowed freedom of movement and opportunity in their own country. And number 3, we moved to Alaska the same year that the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act was signed, and the oil boom began. So I grew up in schools that had teachers who were getting Tier 1 benefits. And no one questioned my family's right to benefit from that. And no one educated me or my parents about whose land we had moved to and whose wealth we were benefiting from. So I want to acknowledge all of this. None of these were decisions that I personally made, but all of them have I benefited from. And I want to just end with some words from Isabel Wilkerson, who compared our current situation to living in an old house. And she says, "Not one of us was here when this house was built, but here we are, the current occupants of a property with stress cracks and bowed walls and fissures built into the foundation. We're heirs to whatever is right or wrong with it. We did not erect the uneven pillars or joists, but they are ours to deal with now." And so for me, that just frames why we're here together, and also just want to thank all of you for the opportunity to do this work together. Welcome, Pastor May.
Howdy.
Okay,
Wow.
sorry.
No. I mean, you know me, I almost started crying. Very impactful, and thank you.
Thanks, Celeste.
Same here, Thea. Thank you so much. Those are such powerful and appreciated words.
Thanks, Marie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do we have any unfinished business? Hearing none, let's get to our new business. Okay, so our special meeting tonight is called because there's 4 items of potential interest on the assembly meeting September 2nd. I want to welcome Pastor May. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I am Pastor, let me turn it on. I am Pastor May, one of the co-chairs. Good evening, everyone. Good to see all of you. Excuse my tardiness. We moved up 30 minutes and I still had student pickup on today, so excuse my tardiness. And I did not get all of your discourse relative to the land and labor acknowledgement, but the part that I did get was very informing, and thank you for taking the time to put all of that together and then share it here.
Thanks. Okay, and we mentioned earlier that we don't yet have a quorum for action. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 6. So we need one more member if we want to take action. But I think even without that, we can meet and discuss these items together, and hopefully we'll get one more member. Okay, so first one is the welcoming week resolution for a vote. And I'm gonna have to apologize right at the beginning because I haven't reviewed any of these, sorry. Is anyone prepared to kind of tell us a little bit more about this one? Or we can just look at it together. And folks online, do you have these to look at? I wonder, Jasmine, do you have them on your?
I emailed them already yesterday.
Oh, you did great. Okay, so everyone should have these in their email.
Yes, we do. Thanks, Jasmine.
I would say the opening thought that I had on this particular one was noting that it was submitted by the full assembly and the mayor, so it appears that everybody is on board and in track with it all. And yeah.
So I did have some thoughts. It's welcoming week, and they talk about celebrating, but there's really one celebration that I could see after reviewing it, and the rest was about just, know your rights training, hosted by ACLU Alaska and the Alaska Institute for Justice. And then there's the one welcoming week community celebration on September 14th. So it just doesn't seem like there's what this resolution is really about. And so my thought was, next year for this, I would love to see this group put forward some celebration. I mean, we could host it maybe in the mayor's conference room, or just have some kind of a celebration relating to this resolution. Because honestly, I heard about Welcoming Week, but I just never knew that there were opportunities to celebrate.
Yeah, my continued thought on that is, I guess the celebration aspect of it and what's being celebrated. When I kind of look at this, and I'm all for welcoming, we better say that out front. And the premise seems to be related to native-born and foreign-born, and bringing the openness, transparency, and welcome into the community between those factions. And I guess my thought and or maybe question is maybe why is there not something in this whole process that relates to underserved, undervalued communities as a part of this process that already exist. And so my thing is, I understand the backbone of it is immigrants, refugees coming in, and also should be inclusive of folk who are coming as it relates to Anchorage from other states, maybe even all of that. But even as part of the process, I guess we should be making Anchorage as a whole welcoming to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good
Not
point.
that I have anything
No,
against this,
totally.
because they've all agreed
Yeah.
on it,
Yeah,
but that's just my thinking.
And I think we can, when we talked about the welcoming certification process that we looked at the last meeting, that was kind of one of the things I think it's really important if we ever decide to move forward with that, is that it isn't just about people who are coming from other countries, like that, exactly what you said, that we're welcoming to everyone.
And let me give some, maybe a little more in-depth thinking on why I raised that. For instance, and I'll speak from African-American Black viewpoint on this, and that is, we've seen all of our lives, historically, as it relates to the United States, that folk can come in from everywhere and get the red carpet rolled out and have access to things that we who have lived here and have been subjected to all kinds of stuff don't have those same rights and privileges. For instance, I recall in my hometown, when the Vietnamese were brought in, everybody else and all of that, and the whole government and the city and everything rolled out red carpet. They had businesses overnight, places to live overnight, housing complexes overnight, and all of that kind of stuff, and we couldn't get a housing loan, kind of thing. And so that's the background from which I come. And so my thinking is that if we're going to do welcoming, then we ought to make Anchorage a city that's welcoming to all, inclusive of immigrants and refugees and native born and underserved and undervalued and all of that. So that's just, yeah.
Marie?
Oh, yes, was that me? Sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
Great, thank you. So I do have some comments as well. Well, I've been involved in some of the Welcoming Week activities in the past. I know there was a huge, at the Northway Mall, tabling, the usual stuff that we do. While I do appreciate the intent of the organizers, I really, let me back up. I think status quo benefits the majority. So anything that we do that is status quo, if we don't rock the boat, it doesn't really change. So I question the impact of activities like this, although I do not discourage it. Thank you, I'm sure it's appreciated. However, I would like for the welcoming committee or whoever's involved in this now, like I think Celeste has said, to partner with our committee in the future for other ways to celebrate and welcome immigrants. Also, I wonder how they measured the impact. I mean, this is our, feel-good events, but who is it making feel good? Welcoming to me is more of an action of helping people really with services. So maybe instead of celebration, there could be more impactful work on researching, talking about what is really the need, and can we train social service agencies, government agencies who normally are in the front lines of helping immigrants to how to really help them, how to make them feel welcome. And also back in the day when this started, I remember it was with then First Lady Mayor Kimmel, there were studies with UAA and actual research with the intent of actually having policies in place that actually would benefit the lives of immigrants. And I'm saying with immigrants, I'm sure it's not limited to that population who benefit from this, but I would like to see a return of those activities that really would change policies and are more inclusive of everyone. And I think that's all.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Joan?
Yeah, thank you. I think Maria answered one of my questions, so I'm not gonna ask it. And then my question is, I mean, we have maybe a week for this to come out in the assembly. So what is the goal of us getting together? Is it to add different things? Because I mean, the timeline is so short that is basically what is the intent. And the other thing is, so maybe for next year, I know maybe the committee can have this in advance, so other organizations can participate, and instead of having just two activities, we can have more from different communities. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. I think as far as what we can do tonight and having a special meeting, and I'm not sure, do you think Felix counts towards our quorum?
No.
I mean, he kind of is a member.
No.
He's a founding member.
See, that's why I kept pushing
Yeah.
for those present at the meeting.
We can ask Felix because he's a parliamentarian expert. But anyway, as far as what we can do tonight, assuming we have a quorum or when we have a quorum, is we can submit written testimony. We could decide we want to have a representative of the committee go and speak in person. So we do have some options, even on a short timeline. So, Felix, did you want to speak to anything that you're hearing about this welcoming week resolution?
Yeah, thanks, Thea. So this welcoming week resolution is a resolution that's put before the assembly pretty much every year, and it's pretty much a standard resolution that the assembly approves. This year, unlike prior years, I think welcoming week's probably going to be a little bit more limited, and that's primarily because everyone was just too busy to do organizing, and in particular, one of the lead organizers for welcoming week, Daryl Huss, municipal ombudsman, has been incredibly busy. If you have been reading the news, you know he has been. So things just unfortunately this year fell through the cracks with organizing for welcoming week. But no, otherwise this is just your standard resolution.
And I think one thing we talked about at our last meeting that we can bring back at our next meeting is whether we wanna consider sort of pushing somebody, maybe it's the Office of Equity and Justice, to move forward with the welcoming certification process that we looked at. So that's a actual action that we could take that would lead to the kind of policy change that Marie was speaking to. Okay, anything more on the welcoming week resolution? Or does anyone want any action recommended?
So I just wanna share, this is Celeste, and I really appreciate this resolution. And as Pastor May shared, I didn't say anything. I was silent, believe it or not, on that. But when I look at this resolution as it's written now, I think it's, again, it's great, but I don't see me in it as a Black woman. And because it spells out immigrants and non-immigrants, but it doesn't go into any specifics except for when we're talking about Athabascans. I think I saw that somewhere. But, and so I'm just wondering, is there a way to make it inclusive and so that everybody feels that they're included in this welcoming week resolution, if that makes sense?
And just a reminder, when we worked on our charter, we worked for a while on kind of describing the communities that we're kind of primarily concerned with, and so, I mean, that language is available.
To possibly incorporate that language in here in the
I
resolution?
don't know if it's maybe too late for that.
Might I make this recommend? And I think Marie and others were kind of alluding to that going forward scenario. And being at this late hour and with what Felix stated about this just being a standard annual resolution that's offered up for approval each year, and all of the Assembly of the Mayor has agreed upon it and all that, but maybe possibly we could have this as one of our agenda items going forward. And so by the time this rolls around next year, we would have had an ample opportunity to have input and maybe get some things placed in here that would be beneficial to all.
Mm-hmm. Great idea. So maybe in July, if this happens in September,
Yeah,
put it on our agenda, yeah. Any objections to that idea? Anything people would like the committee to consider doing for this year, so for the 12th? Do we want to do any written testimony, verbal testimony?
I think it's a good idea to put on the record, whether it's written or at this assembly meeting, in support of this. We definitely need to verbalize it and put it in writing as the equity committee. So I'll make that motion.
Okay, I mean, I see a thumbs up. Felix, any idea on whether you can count towards our quorum?
So Celeste was correct, even though I think she might have been joking. I don't count because I'm not a voting member.
Oh.
No, she wasn't joking.
4, 5,
She was
6.
correct.
Okay, so we can't take formal action right now, but I think we could still, identify what we would want to do as a formal action. And Celeste, were you proposing? I mean, I think we can.
That's what I'm proposing, and maybe we can vote on it toward the end if we get another person. I'm gonna make a phone call.
Right. Okay, so we'll vote on that towards the end. Okay, let's go to the next one. This is the language access ordinance.
Might I say this?
Yeah, please.
We're not obligated as a committee, even per our charter, to have to vote on everything. We can do it by consent,
That's true.
so we don't have to have a formal motion. We can all do it consensually.
Well, we did say to take formal action. What did we write? It's not in this version. Well, let's hold on till see if we can get one more member come, and then we can address it. Anyone want to speak to the language access ordinance? And maybe, Felix, since you're one of the sponsors, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, thanks. I'll help lay the foundation, and I'm happy to hear folks' thoughts. So this is an ordinance that's being introduced on Tuesday. It's set for a public hearing and vote at the meeting of September 26th. In a sense, what this ordinance does is a few things. First, it's I call it the language access ordinance because that's how it started, but it involved a little bit more. So it is language access plus a couple other things. So some of the other things that it does is it requires the chief equity officer to do some really basic analytics and reporting across a few different areas: education, economics, wellness, access to municipal services, and to provide some semi-annual reporting to the assembly and the mayor on these areas. In addition, the chief equity officer is responsible for making sure that the business enterprise activities that OEO does is in compliance. So some of the DBE work that OEO does, that all of that work is done in compliance with local, state, federal laws. And then the language access part is also included in here two ways. One, the OEO is responsible for reviewing departmental language access plans and make sure that there is compliance with language access laws by each department. And then the purchasing officer is also responsible for making sure that any contractors we have comply with federal regulation regarding language access plans, as well as the purchasing officer is responsible for making sure that subcontractors and contractors sorry, hold on. Right, so the purchasing officer is responsible for monitoring the DBE program and the contractors and subcontractors, just to make sure that that program is moving forward, doing as intended. So that's two sides from it. You have the Office of Equity and OEO, and then you have the purchasing officer who are looking at these things, making sure that what's supposed to be happening with the DBE program and with language access is happening. Plus the reporting the equity officer is going to do on a semi-annual basis. That's the main components of the ordinance.
Thanks, Felix. I just want to say that the things you've identified in this ordinance many of them are kind of on our priority list, so it's pretty awesome to see them laid out here. Seems like a great move. What other thoughts do people have?
I would basically say thank you, Felix, you and Mr. Martinez, for this ordinance and the drafting thereof. Under the Office of Equal Opportunity Director and the Purchasing Officer, the language access is directly been to that effective. But the thing I really want to say thanks about was relative to the Chief Equity Officer having some stuff in writing that would seem to be quite applicable to what that title would reflect. And we need more than somebody out in the community being a liaison for the mayor and a meet and greet kind of person that functions and events and all of that. We need some equity work being done. This kind of states out some of that. And so I want to applaud the two of you for at least drafting this, not knowing where it's gonna go as far as, the final resolving of it, but, thanks.
Joan?
There we go. Yes, so I have a question for Felix. Two questions. One, is this ordinance that also is included about women in as part of minority and having like equal access to opportunities? That's one question. And my second question is, how likely is this to pass on the 12th?
Thanks. So, first question, when it comes to the DBE program, yes. I'm just calling it DBE, but it is D/WBE. So it does include women. Then when it comes to the ordinance, so the ordinance is going to be before us, not on the 12th. It's only on the 12th for introduction. It's for vote on September 26th. And I really can't gauge. I haven't had a chance to talk with my colleagues about this because it hasn't gotten on the agenda yet, so I can't talk with them publicly about it. I would assume that a majority of my colleagues would be generally supportive, but you always have to, when you get into the weeds of it, that's when things get sorted out, and we haven't had a chance to do that yet. But I would hope that a majority of my colleagues would be supportive.
Okay, thanks, Felix.
Marty?
Thanks. A couple of comments and sorry, my dog's upset about something. This ordinance is appreciated, Felix, thanks, and I think I heard George is responsible for this too, so thank you. And back in the day, I remember Amy Kaufman giving a training on this when it was new. And then after that, I think when that administration left, I'm not sure what the activity is on the language access service. So I wonder if there's something that can be done to maybe just revive that effort in this service. And also, I think, although on the surface, it seems like you thought of everything for compliance, I've also seen the other side of how departments see things like this as extra work for them, and especially for a busy service agency where, they really don't have time to what they see as an additional duty. And so I wonder what can be done to really, again, I'm skeptical of the reports. Yes, departments can just report their use of it, and the equity officer will just take that and put it in the annual report for all of you, but it really doesn't tell the story of what was missed. I don't have suggestion right now, but I'd like to put more thought into that, not just me, but everybody, on how can we really make sure they're complying, because we never really know, but what other efforts can we use, because this is important for people who really need it. And unfortunately, to a lot of people, like I said, they may not realize that how significant it is. And with that effort, I wonder if the administration can actually make a push for it. I don't know how much difference it would make, but a message from the mayor that is, we have to encourage this, so please do it, and their directors to really encourage people and help them realize how significant this is for people who need it. And it's the law, it's actually in federal law, but hopefully compliance with the law is not the reason for doing it, but to actually provide equity and great service to people who may not speak English. Thank you.
So I'd like to add some comments, and I too think this is wonderful. So thank you, Felix and George Martinez. My concern too is, the implementation. It starts, as was just shared by Maria at the top, And, you know, if we have an administration, a mayor that really supports this effort, that's great. But I think the first thing is to get this in writing, although we do have a job description that's in writing for the position we're talking about currently. And it's great to have stuff in writing, but the enforcement piece, when individuals aren't doing their jobs, I'm just really frustrated that this is where we are after years. There has been no work as it relates to equity for the municipality in that position. And I'm just putting it on the record. I'm not sugarcoating. I'm speaking some truth here. And this is why this position was created, to do this very work. So I'm disappointed to the utmost. And this committee needs to be all over this. So thank you.
That, just real quick, that's one thing I was gonna say actually, is with the part, just reflecting that, what's in this ordinance, reflects some of our priorities. I wonder if in, section AD, where we talk about the data, and also just reflecting on what I think Joan was saying earlier about asking if women were included. There isn't really a definition in here, not that this would be the right place for it, for what we mean by systemic inequity or like who we would be addressing. I wonder if this committee should actually be included in this ordinance somehow, that this work would occur with this committee in some way, or at least maybe has to be done in consultation with the committee. I don't even know if that's possible, but or what people think about that, but it seems like that would provide some accountability, like Celeste is asking for.
Speak directly to your point. I don't know that this committee would be a formal aspect of that, but I do know that this committee has been put in motion to look at every situation and circumstance where there's an inequity, and certainly that would be inclusive of the chief equity officer not doing his job, and so from that aspect, yes. My thought that I wanted to share was this, that if the chief equity officer is under the direct administration of the mayor in his office, then there's part of the issue right there. If there was some way that could be taken out from that and put in another compartment, for lack of a better word. Speaking about the chief equity officer, if you're really doing the job description, you might be short for a job. And the reason I say that is because the black guy that was in the position, chief executive officer, was attempting to do the job description and gave the municipality an unfavorable report in a certain area, and it was not long after that he didn't have a job. And then we get a new chief equity officer that's basically on a meet and greet run. And let me say this, because I know we on record and all of that. Mr. Junior Amave is this is not personal. And I do want to say I'd like to keep personalities out of it and speak to the job and the job description. So this is not against him as a person or anything, trying to keep it from being personal, but the job description requires more.
And if I could just add one, I see Maria has her hand, but I just want to say something as we talk about discrimination running rampant in the municipality when you have a director of the Office of Equal Opportunity investigating discrimination and getting terminated because of the findings that she was able to conclude that investigation with. And so the system is all screwed up. And this is why this is so important to get past and begin working in that area. Murray?
You did great, thank you. And yes, my comments earlier was just on the language access, but when Celeste mentioned as far as the performance and what's expected of the equity officer, I wanted to add to that I was very encouraged when this position was created, because again, it's very much needed by our community, but also disappointed thinking of the amount of money that our government community is spending on that, and we don't seem to see any of the results. At least, I'm big on policy because really that's what can affect us, would have the more impact. There seems to be none of that happening, even whatever was in code that now, when that was created, I don't think we see anything resulting from that. What I would like to add on the record with that maybe the Assembly can help is what exactly would be the measure of success for this position. And if left to just the person holding that office, how, like Thea said, accountability is great. Who does that? And also, just based on experience from when I was at the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission, our director for that is similar to how the equity officer's position was created, reporting to the Assembly or whatever, appointed by the mayor, approved by the Assembly, and somehow there's ambiguity on who reviews who's responsible for reviewing the performance of the director. So I don't know if that's unclear with that position as well with the equity officer. I'd like to have that clear on who reviews the performance of the person in this position, and also what are the measurements for evaluation and for success. Thank you.
So, Felix, do you want to just share back anything that you're hearing that you think might, requires addition or alteration of the language that you have so far?
Yeah, thanks. Happy to provide some comments. And thanks everyone for weighing in. So with regard to the PNP that was put forward during the Berkowitz administration, that PNP, I would say even during the Berkowitz administration, had an uneven, it was not necessarily evenly enforced across all departments, and I think we're still seeing that difficulty of all departments. There are some departments who are decent with language access, but there are a variety of departments that I think have issues where don't even think about language access. So I think that's I think the PNP is good, but I think putting it in code that we're going to do a review annually, I think will push this I think to a little bit of a higher level. And I think one of the things that's important to realize is that language access is not an additional, in my opinion, is not an additional job, but it is a requirement for us, since we receive federal funds. It is a requirement for us to provide language access. And so in that vein, I don't see this as adding to duties, but really providing accountability to the duties that departments should be doing. When it comes to the reporting, I do think that implementation is going to be key. And this ordinance really doesn't deal with implementation. And nor do I think it should necessarily deal with implementation of how that reporting happens. But that's certainly something that conversations need to happen with the Office of Equity to provide some guidance as to implementing that particular part of the ordinance if this gets approved. And I think getting to the job description, I think one of the things that I think it's important for folks to realize is that with and this gets to something else that was said, with the lawsuit that happened that pretty much said, summarizing here, sort of separation of powers, assembly, you can't sort of put your thumb on the scale with regard to the chief equity officer. That's why, frankly, we're having to do things like this, like putting it in code, because that job description that we helped write is meaningless now because of that court case. And so that is why this is happening. That's also why the performance review, that's not something that we can do because, again, that court case, that position is directly under the mayor, and the mayor would be responsible for that performance review. The assembly would have no say in that unless the mayor invited us to. I doubt that would happen under this administration. The same thing, and I guess it depends on measurements for success. If we're talking about measurements for success for the chief equity officer position, or for like how we want to move forward in terms of these categories that we're looking at for this semi-annual reporting, how we want to gauge those and sort of what metrics do we want to set for that reporting. I think that's a good conversation to have. For me, I would want to see baseline reporting first and really do a good job fleshing out what baseline reporting would look like. And then we can have a conversation of now we have baseline reporting. Now let's talk about what metrics should look like after we know what our baseline is. But we don't even really know what the baseline is, in my opinion.
Thanks, Felix. Do any committee members want to suggest action that the committee should take related to this ordinance? And I have one suggestion. I'm just curious if Felix and the committee think that actually adding our committee's name in here as a entity that the chief equity officer would be collaborating with, specifically for the getting the baseline data that you were describing, if anyone thinks that's a good idea.
I think it's a great idea. And even for more than that, I mean, I think we could offer all kind of assistance in various ways. Because there's a lot here.
Yes, and I'll pick on that in this regard, that in as much as the chief equity officer is a former member of this particular committee, then I guess we probably should be more forthcoming as it relates to making inroads into those areas that we see that need some equity attention, and as a committee member, holding his feet to the fire in that regard.
Felix, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting idea. I think two things. I want to talk about it a little bit more with George, and I might want to finesse the language a little bit because we don't put committees in our code, so this will be a little bit different. And then second thing is I would just want to also have some conversations with Assembly Council Because again, that, and especially when it comes to this position, that lawsuit really looms large. But happy to have conversations and finesse that idea.
Yeah, it's a good point. It kind of gets us back to that. Okay, any other comments? And this one we have a little bit of time on because it's just being introduced on the 12th. So any other thoughts or comments on this one?
I just want to add, it's huge purchasing. That's a huge one because those are jobs. I mean, you know, and the other thing is the municipal departments. When we look at the AERC office and the funding for that, as well as the OEO office and the funding for that, they're limited with funds, they're limited with employees. It makes it difficult to investigate complaints of discrimination. So there's a lot, again, there's a lot of work that's needed.
Oh, can I add something again? Sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
I just follow Celeste because she has great ideas, and then I think of spurs new ideas. With purchasing, it's so paper intensive. Most of their, at least what I know of, most of the processes are online or in writing, and I think they would have to be proactive more in providing language services. So I don't know how to make that happen. But when they have their RFQs or anything that they post online, they have a great website. It's all well and good if you speak English. And theirs is also so process intensive that there are so many steps to comply with. And I guess this is where OEO can also help because they work with contractors. But yeah, I don't know how to address that, but that to include maybe a language in their paperwork, in their postings online about language access, or I don't know if you put that there in English, it really doesn't help, but just an idea because theirs is, again, so all written, it's a different material and so process, like I said, process intensive. So that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Marie. Okay, should we move to the next one? Let's go to emergency cold weather shelter funds for a vote. And again, Felix, I see you're one of the sponsors of this. Do you want to just give a quick kind of review of this for the committee?
Sure. So I think, like I said at the last committee meeting, there are two phases of this work when it comes to emergency shelter. There is the finding the funding for emergency shelter, and then there is the part where the Anchorage Health Department puts forward the contracts to implement emergency cold weather shelter. So this is the first part. This is the funding for it. The Assembly has worked pretty closely with the Anchorage Health Department, and so we have some good estimates from the Anchorage Health Department of how much emergency cold weather shelter might cost for at least through December. And so we feel confident with there was actually a different version that was included on the agenda. So I think you have the original version, but there was an S version that was included on the agenda that had some policy statements included in the mix here. But ignoring those policy statements and just focusing on the dollars, we feel pretty confident that the dollars in here will meet us through December. In fact, more than confident. We're probably going to have money left over here. And then through the November budget process, where we will determine and set the budget for 2024, that is when we will consider funding for the January through April part of this. So this is just the October through December part. And I guess just to briefly talk about the other parts in the S version that you don't have in front of you. Let me just pull it up really quick. So the S version just makes some minor changes to some of the funding, just because we've learned a little bit more about how much money there really is, which is always an adventure, digging into the bank account and seeing how much money we actually have in some of these funds. But otherwise, the main changes in the S version are policy related, and so those include things like, where are you? There you are. So ensuring that emergency shelter is focused on making successful transitions into housing. And we set sort of a benchmark here. Optimally, individuals using emergency shelter will stay there for 90 days and then they'll move on to housing. Or that'll be their maximum stay, I should say. It'd be great if they stay less than 90 days. And then another policy statements around food. So basically following a food policy that the Assembly approved in 2022 that basically says we're going to follow USDA nutritional guidelines. We're going to make sure 3 meals are offered or have people have the opportunity for 3 meals a day, those kinds of things. Also is included a policy statement around congregate shelter, and that the maximum size for congregate shelter is going to be 150 individuals, 150. That any warming areas that are stood up will not be located with emergency shelter. And then that any emergency shelter that is stood up are required to use HMIS, and they're required to make sure that everyone who comes into the shelter has a coordinated entry assessment done within the first 7 days of their initial stay. So those are some of the policy provisions that you guys don't see in the original version that were included in the S version that came out earlier today. That's pretty much it.
That's super helpful. Thanks, Felix. Thoughts or input on this one?
So I guess my question would be, this almost $6 million, is that just for October through December for like maybe 450 people?
Yeah, so by my sort of budget estimates, we're really looking probably at more like $4 to $5 million that we're going to need for 2023, so October through December. And that other part of the money, we're just really trying to set it aside so that we know that that money is there. And then in November and December, we will reappropriate those funds so that it can be used for January through April. But yeah, generally, I think it's probably going to be more than $4 to $5 million for those 450 individuals.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a gigantic amount of money. And yeah, I guess I'm just curious, what's the forum for conversation to identify better strategies? And, because to me, it's a little outdated that we still think of emergency shelter as related to the weather, because so many people die in the summer. But if we had to do this 12 months a year, it'd be even more expensive. So, Felix, what's the forum for a more robust conversation about what emergency shelter looks like and what the cost, can be and should be year to year?
Yeah, thanks. So, I think a lot of this is, really talking about the nomenclature, right? So this is really emergency cold weather shelter. And so emergency cold weather shelter, as defined in our code, is really all about making sure that during our winters and during our coldest periods of time, we don't have individuals dying on our streets. And you all have seen the media reports of how, particularly the last winter, and we had an extraordinary amount of people die last winter, and we don't want to repeat that same thing. So, but that is just really one piece, right? Emergency cold weather shelter is one piece of the puzzle, and that's something that gets turned on, turned off every year. In my opinion, if we are successful with other pieces of the puzzle, then the emergency cold weather shelter part of the puzzle can get smaller and smaller, and well, I think we're always going to have some kind of emergency cold weather shelter, period. But it at least won't be, millions of dollars. Last year we spent $11 million. This year we're probably going to be spending $8-9 million, right? So that is the hope, that number starts to get smaller and smaller of the total dollar figure that we need to spend on emergency cold weather shelter, because we are successful with some of the other parts of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle is emergency shelter, and that is really just year-round shelter. And so there are a lot of conversations that are currently occurring within the Housing and Homelessness Committee, within the Clean Slate Strategy, to help us address what emergency shelter could and should look like, and the need for that permanent shelter. We know that we need an additional permanent year-round shelter. We're also talking and looking at the ideas that the Sanctioned Camp Task Force brought forward to look at sort of pallet shelters, tiny homes, whatever variation you want to use, to see how those might take place. So that's another part of the puzzle. And then the biggest part of the puzzle that we need to really invest some more in, be more successful in, is the housing part of the puzzle, and other attached services to said housing. And so that is another piece that those conversations happen within the Housing and Homelessness Committee, within the CEDC committee, within so many groups in the community. And there's actually a housing summit that's going to be happening in November, where we're going to continue that conversation. So there's a lot of forums where we're having these conversations about the different pieces of the puzzle and how we can possibly solve them. As you know, Thea, you were heavily involved with the Complex Behavioral Health Task Force, and that's a critical component to a lot of this work as well.
So the housing aspect of it it's quite pricey, I guess, because in my mind, trying to wrap my mind around 450 people, which does not to me seem like an astronomical number, and to take for a couple of months of housing almost between $4 and $5 million. I mean, that's mind-boggling to me. But anyway, the other thing is that I wanted to raise is, I guess that's related to the data that's been presented, but I'm sure that there are a myriad of others who've fallen through the cracks in that head count and are not accounted for as it relates to housing. And then what do you do with those persons, because I'm familiar with that side of it too, what do you do with those persons who refuse to accept the housing?
Do you want me to address that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Yeah, sure. No, this is a good question. So, in terms of the total count, we are working off the best estimates that we've been able to get, both from the Anchorage Health Department and the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. And yeah, it's a constant question that we ask: is the target number correct? And by and large, those organizations, AHD and ACEH, do feel like the target number that we are trying for is correct. If that changes, then hopefully we'll be nimble and flexible enough that we can adjust things midwinter. But I suspect that we will have built enough infrastructure for this winter that will be fine. With regard to housing and individuals who may be difficult to house, yeah, that's why, for individuals who may be difficult to house, it's all about sort of the journey that those individuals are taking to become successful in housing. And there's different types of housing. There's independent housing, workforce housing, affordable housing. There's also something called permanent supportive housing, where, frankly, the folks who fall into that category of, potentially difficult to house really need a wide breadth of supports to make them be more successful in housing. And so we have actually some pretty good models of permanent supportive housing, particularly by United Way for the Home for Good, Pay for Success model, where they are some of our most difficult individuals who spend excessive amounts of time in jail, spend excessive amounts of time in the hospitals, where they are becoming stably housed. It takes a lot of money, takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of coordination, it just takes a lot. But there are those models. Now it's just about how we can replicate those models, how we can just do more of that work. Also, one of the reasons why there has been a lot of talk around the allowed camps or sanctioned camps, whatever you want to call them, it is sort of realizing that folks are coming at different levels. And so someone's level may be an allowed camp is the best and most appropriate place for them to be. But we want to transition them into housing as quickly as possible. That's how our system is built. We're a housing first municipality, and we just need to be able to have the resources to implement that system in a successful, iterative way that doesn't cause people to go into housing, out of housing, and do this sort of hamster wheel.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this one?
I have something quick to add, and that is it's almost like we really don't have a choice. We don't want people dying continuously in the winter time, and we gotta do what we gotta do. That's all I have.
One comment I have is just that our committee did our initial round of introductions to other committees, but I think at some point we probably want to identify who's a liaison with some specific committees, and it seems like the housing and homelessness one would be a good one to have a person attending regularly. So maybe we can think about that at one of our next meetings. Okay, any other comments on that one? Thanks, Joan. Oh, Jerry left. Okay, let's go to the last one, Don Young, naming panel recommendations for a vote. So this one is coming from the office of the mayor. And I just looked through this. There was a panel, Jim Jansen, Gail Schubert, Amanda Mosier, and Aaron Leggett. I just want to note that Aaron Leggett's from the Klutna tribe. And looks like they all voted in favor of naming the port after Don Young. So, does anyone have any discussion on this one? Oh, go ahead, Marie.
Thank you. I am just, my personal opinion on naming structures really is just, it's hard to find someone really that would represent the entire population, I guess, so that's impossible. However, I think the advantage of the people who are now being considered for this, whose names, whose these facilities would be named after them, also enjoyed so much privilege that a lot of people did not get. So it's status quo, and as I said earlier, it only benefits the same people. So unless we start doing something different, it's going to remain the same. So I see this as another one of those things that we do. And the other thing is that I know and I do appreciate his service. He did, a lot for Alaska, and I think that's what everyone has been saying, is that he, or at least what I've heard, is that he had brought in a lot of dollars that we've enjoyed here in Alaska. However, I think what values are important to us? Is character not important to us? So what are we prioritizing as far as what our structures and important infrastructures are named after? So I guess to me, I'd rather not see it named an important infrastructure like that. I guess, really named after a politician, maybe, if they did something, to advance civil rights, yes. But anyway, again, personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Felix?
Yeah, thanks. So this didn't get put on the agenda, and I think I might have just forgot it, but I just want to address the systemic part of that question. So I expect that this naming panel recommendation, plus there might be like a small handful of naming panels out there that are still doing their work, are going to be the last of that generation of naming panels, because as I think Cameron and then myself have talked about to this committee, there's going to be an ordinance that's actually up for a vote on Tuesday. There's going to be a public hearing and vote on Tuesday at the assembly meeting that structurally changes how we do naming panels. In fact, there will be no more naming panels. It'll be a naming commission, and it's has a very structural, different way how they look at naming policy process, so that we aren't so individual focused. Not that individuals can't get things named after them, but it really takes a different approach, a different tact, and a different look at how we name things, what we name, how we honor and recognize our indigenous cultures, all these different aspects. And so we'll be voting on that. And so after Tuesday, there aren't going to be any more of these kinds of naming panels created. It'll be a very different kind of structure. Assuming that ordinance gets passed. Thanks.
And Felix, I was wondering about that. So in the new structure, will there be more opportunity for broader community input on naming?
Yes, there will be. The naming commission is going to be charged with creating an annual naming plan, and part of that naming plan is going to require opportunities for the public to weigh in and suggest things to be named or individuals to name things after. So the new structure outside of the naming plan, there's going to be three main ways that something can get named. Either the mayor or the assembly sort of push something forward and say, hey, naming commission, take a look at this. It's in the naming plan. Or three, a group of the public or an individual public member can come to the naming commission and ask them to consider naming something. So I think it'll be a really great process moving forward.
So I just have a quick question. How is the commission going to be comprised? Because I would hope that it would be diverse to the utmost.
Yes, absolutely. And that's certainly something that we took heavily into consideration. So let me go ahead and grab that ordinance really quick. That is... And for those of you, everyone got a link to the agenda. So it's 14C on the agenda if you want to take a look at it there. So I'm just opening it now and moving on to the commission. So there are going to be 9 individuals on the commission, which is fairly standard. And so 5 of those individuals are going to have some specific qualifications, and then 4 of them are going to be at-large members who reside in different neighborhoods. So the 5 that have specific qualifications, one of them is a member with a background in history, anthropology, or archaeology. Another one is an Alaska Native culture advisor with knowledge of local indigenous history and culture. A third one is a person recommended by the native village of Eklutna. A fourth one is a member with expertise in historic preservation. And then a fifth one is a member with experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So those are the 5 specific ones that have sort of qualifications, and then the other 4 are at large. They don't have any specific qualifications.
So the other 4 will come from the various diverse neighborhoods, is that right?
So the other 4, the way it's written is that the 4 at-large members will reside in different areas or neighborhoods. So that we're not pulling from just like one specific neighborhood or one part of the town for those 4 at-large members. They're all going to be from different parts of the municipality.
Okay, because I was just trying to see how someone from the Black community could be on that commission. And because you named 2 individuals from the Native community. And so it's so important that we're represented, because I've witnessed too many times when we're absent, we are not thought about because for whatever reason, individuals can't relate to us because they don't see us. And so if we're not there, we are not represented and we're dismissed.
Yeah, thanks, Celeste. That's a really good point. So I just do want to clarify that one of them is an Alaska Native culture advisor. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they will be Native, although more likely than not, they probably will be Alaska Native. And then a person recommended by the native village of Eklutna. So those 2 we felt like it was particularly important, especially because if you read through the ordinance, a lot of the ordinance is really making sure that we're taking traditional indigenous place names into account, and trying to rectify the historic wrongs in our decades of naming things in the municipality of Anchorage. And one of the things that we really tried to do was try to get a variety of different diverse perspectives. As we were coming up though with the language, it was fairly clear within the legal framework that we were working in that we couldn't do things like say one person must come from the African American community and one person must come from the Filipino community. That would be illegal for us to do something like that, unfortunately, just within the framework of the law that we have to abide in. But we tried to make it so that these different individuals would represent, I think, an important broad swath of the community and really fall in line with the policies that's outlined in here. So I guess the last comment is we are going to make sure whenever these appointments come to us from the administration that they do, I speak for myself, I will make sure that these appointments, whenever they come to us from the administration, that they do represent a wide variety of voices. That's important for me. I know it's important for Cameron, and I know it's important for Daniel, who all 3 of us work together on this.
Yeah, I want to thank you for your discourse, because in the course of your discourse, you kind of answered the question I was going to have relative to the panel, because I noted in the paperwork of the 4 persons, 3 voted for and 1 was absent, but later came on to say that they were in favor of it. and also there was no chair on this particular panel. And my question was going to be, how did the panel come to be? And so you kind of answered that by going to a different paradigm relative to a naming commission and all of that. And so, thanks.
Okay, any more comments on the Don Young naming? Okay, I just want to kind of wrap up what we've talked about. So in terms of our first topic, which was the Welcoming Week resolution, sounded like everyone present was very supportive. However, looking to ensure that in the future we're talking about being welcoming to everyone and thinking about underserved and undervalued communities. And also that we're celebrating, but we're also being real and thinking about what types of policies we need in order to actually make change. And that's where, the consideration of the welcoming certification that we've talked about, I think comes back up. And that we would potentially want this added to our July agenda next year, especially if Daryl Hess was working on it again, so that we could work on this resolution and make it a little bit more meaningful next year. So that was a summary of what we talked about with number one. Number two, which is go ahead. Celeste.
And to make sure that somehow this group is included in a celebration.
Yes, right. Sorry. That we
I want us to be active.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. Okay. And then for the second one, which starts out talking about language access and includes the items related to the chief equity officer and collecting baseline data and overseeing the contracting, which again are really aligned with a lot of our priorities. That one's being introduced next week, but there's still a couple weeks until it's voted on. I don't think we had any substantive input on that one because it doesn't seem like adding our committee in there is necessarily possible. But just it sounded from what Felix said that he would maybe think about, or maybe talk with legal about that. Looking over here. Yeah, okay.
And the fact that we definitely support the intent.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, because this is the data we need to even work towards the policy change, yeah. Okay, and then for the cold weather shelter, I think we're all in favor. Like Celeste said, there's not a ton of choice, it's a ton of money. And potentially would like to be more involved in these conversations. Appreciate what Felix said, if we're successful, this amount of money will go down. I don't think there was any action on that other than thinking of having a committee liaison so we can be involved going forward. And then for number 4, Marie spoke, maybe for some of the other folks present that, really asking the question of what values we're prioritizing, especially when we're bringing forward a politician. But then Felix shared that this is the last time we'll do the naming this way. So an opportunity for individuals and maybe the committee to be involved in naming going forward. So I don't think there was any particular action on that last one either. Anything to add or change to that summary? Okay, and then I just want to, just before we leave, in the chat, Lena, before she left, had talked about who enforces the federal rules around limited English proficiency, and that most agencies have an office that's responsible for enforcing those rules. And then Felix responded saying we don't have anyone in the MOA that enforces this, which is why this ordinance adds that responsibility to a particular office. So that's a really good point. Okay, any further discussion or questions? I think that was, for me anyway, super helpful rundown of these important items. Any audience participation? Any objection? Oop. Any objection to adjourning?
So move, I mean,
Yeah.
I make the motion.
Have a great, thanks for being here, Marie. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye, Lena.